Rachel Moore saw her husband embracing and kissing her son's fiancée right there in the living room, only hours before the wedding. And in the moment when she could barely breathe, her son appeared at the top of the stairs, his face cold as stone, whispering that everything was worse than she thought. Morning in Aspen Ridge, Colorado began beneath a dark, heavy sky and a silence so thick it felt suffocating. In the spacious house overlooking the mist-covered mountains, Rachel had been awake since early dawn, not from excitement, but from an unease that clawed relentlessly at her chest. Today was Noah's wedding day, a day when a mother should have been smiling and letting go, but Rachel could not. She sat in the small downstairs office, the glow of the desk lamp spilling over tax spreadsheets and financial figures. Rachel ran a home-based accounting service, quiet but steady, enough to put her son through college and fill the gaps Thomas's salary never reached. From the outside, people only saw Thomas Moore, the charming, talkative man who was always the center of every party. And Rachel, they usually called her simply the devoted wife. No one knew that she was the true foundation of this family. Out back, the decorating crew was arranging rows of white chairs. The string lights would be switched on at sunset, turning the garden into a fairy tale scene. Rachel had tended every flower bed, adjusted every tiny detail, as if the perfection of the ceremony could cover the silent cracks in her marriage. 25 years, a lifetime long enough to grow used to enduring. But in recent months, Thomas had changed. He would fall into sudden silence whenever Rachel entered a room. His phone always tilted away from her view. Meetings that stretched late into the night, explanations smooth as silk. And Rachel, like so many women who had spent their lives holding a family together, chose to believe. The office door opened softly. Noah stepped in, a cup of coffee in his hand. His eyes were shadowed, exhaustion weighing heavily on his young face. Noah had inherited his mother's practicality and his father's good looks, but today he looked like someone standing on the edge of an abyss. "Mom, you've been up for a long time," Noah said, his voice rough. "The wedding isn't until this evening." Rachel forced a smile. "I just want everything to be perfect for you." Noah hesitated, then asked in a voice so quiet, as if the question itself might shatter the world, "Do you think Betrayal really loves me?" The words struck Rachel straight in the heart. Betrayal Hart, Noah's fiancé, a beautiful young lawyer from a prominent family, moved as though she always knew she belonged among the elite. On the surface, she was the perfect choice. But sometimes Rachel caught Betrayal's distant gaze when Noah spoke about his dreams, caught her looking at her phone during family dinners. "Why do you ask that? Today is your wedding day." Noah tightened his grip on the coffee cup. "Sometimes I feel like she looks right through me, like I'm just a checkbox in her flawless life plan. And Mom? Lately she's been spending a lot of time with Dad." Rachel went still. "She says Dad is mentoring her about finances, about assets after marriage. But I've seen it, the way she lights up when he calls, the way Dad looks at her. It doesn't look like a future father-in-law." The air thickened. Rachel wanted to say she had noticed too, that she had suspected too, but before she could speak, the door opened again. Thomas stood there, dressed neatly, his perfect smile like a mask. He looked at them, a flicker of surprise passing through his eyes before returning to warmth. "The big day, son. You should get ready." Then he turned to Rachel. "Betrayal just called. She'll be here around 10 to go over a few last details." Noah replied, his voice flat. "Details about what?" Thomas chuckled softly, waving it off. "Just seating arrangements. Her family is very particular, you know that." Rachel stared at her husband. In that moment, she understood what Noah was trying to say. Something was wrong at its very core. When Thomas and Noah left, Rachel stood alone in the room, a chill running down her spine. She canceled a call with the catering team, lying that something urgent had come up. The truth was, she had just decided on something she had never done in 25 years. She would not close her eyes anymore. Exactly at 10 o'clock, Betrayal's car rolled into the driveway. Rachel watched through the window, her heart pounding like a war drum, a sense of an approaching storm. In this very house, on her son's wedding day, a truth was waiting to be exposed, and Rachel Moore, the woman everyone assumed only stood in the background, was in fact holding enough power to turn this perfect day into one no one would ever forget. The morning stretched on like a wire pulled so tight that the slightest touch could make it snap. After Betrayal stepped into the house, Rachel could no longer clearly hear the wind in the garden or the footsteps of the people preparing for the wedding. Every sound seemed to be pushed far away, making room only for the heavy rhythm of her heart pounding inside her chest. Betrayal Hart arrived with the effortless confidence of someone who had never once had to doubt her place in the world. Even in a simple blouse and jeans, she looked like a flawless advertisement. Her hair was neatly styled, her smile perfectly measured, her eyes bright and sharp. She walked into the living room as if the space had belonged to her for years. Thomas was already there, waiting. He smiled, the same smile the neighbors always praised as warm, but Rachel, who had lived beside him for more than 2 decades, could see the tension buried beneath that surface. He was too polished, too prepared, like a man performing an important role. Rachel stood in the hallway, half hidden behind the door, and Noah's question echoed in her mind like an irreversible warning. I feel like she looks right through me, and the way Dad looks at her, it isn't right. Betrayal set her bag down and tilted her head, her voice gentle. Uncle Thomas, I just want to be sure everything is in order. My parents are very sensitive about small details. They want the wedding to be perfect. A perfect wedding, Thomas repeated in a low voice. Of course. For a family like the Ellingtons, no, the Harts, honor is always the most important thing. Rachel frowned. Betrayal always spoke of honor, of image, of what was proper, as if it were an unspoken law. She talked about the wedding, not like a ritual of love, but like a social event that had to be absolutely flawless. Thomas poured a glass of water and handed it to Betrayal, a gesture far too intimate to ignore, and Betrayal accepted it as if it were entirely natural. Suddenly, Rachel felt like an outsider in her own home. Betrayal glanced toward the staircase and asked casually, "Where is Noah?" Thomas answered quickly, "He's getting ready with his groomsmen. He's very nervous today." Betrayal smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. Nervous is normal, but you know Noah can be too dreamy sometimes. I think after we're married, I'll need someone more practical to help guide him. The words dropped like black ink into clear water. Rachel's hands clenched. Betrayal spoke about her son the way one spoke about a project that needed fixing. Thomas nodded slowly. You need someone who understands how the real world actually works. Someone like you, Betrayal murmured, her eyes flashing. Rachel did not miss that look. In that instant, she realized Betrayal was not only searching for a husband, she was searching for power, for leverage, for a doorway into a higher world. And Thomas, a man who had always loved being admired, was drinking in that admiration like strong liquor. Rachel stepped back, her heart pounding violently. She wanted to walk out, to remind them that she was still here. But something deep inside held her still, because she understood that sometimes the truth must expose itself under its own light. Upstairs, Noah stood in his room staring into the mirror. His suit was hanging ready. Everything was perfectly arranged, yet in his eyes there was only a dark, aching pain. He remembered all the times Betrayal asked about his father more than she asked about him. The late-night messages claiming she was discussing finances with Thomas. The dinners where Betrayal nearly forgot Noah was even sitting beside her. Noah had thought he was being irrationally jealous until he saw them in the garden, too close, too familiar. He hadn't told his mother because she had sacrificed too much. Noah didn't want to break her again. But now, watching everything unfold under the same roof, he knew there was no way back. In the living room, Betrayal lowered her voice. Uncle Thomas, I want to ask about that investment fund you mentioned. I think if Noah signs after the marriage, everything will be easier. Thomas let out a small laugh. Yes, but you must be careful. Noah trusts people. He's like his mother. Too honest. Rachel heard that like a slap. Honest, in Thomas's mouth, became a weakness. Brielle leaned closer, her voice soft as velvet. I only want everything to go smoothly. I want a secure future. Thomas looked at her longer than necessary, and in his gaze, Rachel saw something that made her stomach tighten. It was not only desire, it was complicity. Two people recognizing the same kind of ambition in each other. Rachel understood a cold truth. Brielle did not love Noah, and Thomas no longer belonged to this family. Just then, Rachel's phone vibrated. A message from Carmen, her sister, only one short line, sharp as a blade. Be careful. Thomas hasn't only betrayed you once. Rachel stared at the screen, her breath stopping. A new twist opened like a dark doorway. Not just one affair, not just one young woman, something deeper, longer, darker. Outside, the white chairs were still lined up neatly. The flowers still smelled sweet. The lights would still glow when sunset fell. A wedding was waiting to begin. But inside the house, a family was rotting from the root. Rachel Moore, the woman everyone saw as the silent foundation, was standing in the eye of the storm. And as she began to see the truth clearly, she also began to become something none of them had ever expected. A storm called consequence. Rachel did not step into the living room right away. She stood motionless in the hallway, feeling as if the entire house was exhaling something poisonous. Carmen's message still sat on her phone screen like a blade that had not yet been pulled out. Thomas hasn't only betrayed you once. A short sentence, but enough to tilt Rachel's world off its axis. She looked through the doorway. Brielle was still there, standing near the fireplace, the very place where they took family photos every Christmas. Thomas said something that made Brielle laugh. Her clear, bright laughter rang out, and Rachel suddenly realized it had been a long time since she had heard Thomas laugh like that with her. A real laugh, not polite, not social, but the laughter of a man who felt alive again. Rachel felt something inside her die, very softly. Outside in the backyard, the wind swept through the rows of white chairs, making the covers flutter like little ghosts. Everything was still beautiful, still perfect, but it was only a shell. Inside, a crack was opening wide. She could not bear to stand there listening to them talk as if this were an ordinary meeting. Rachel turned and hurried toward the back door. Without thinking, only instinct. She needed to see, to confirm, to know she wasn't losing her mind. She circled around the side of the house, crouching low, slipping behind the large hydrangea bush she had tended since spring. The blue and violet blooms swayed innocently, unaware they were about to witness the collapse of an entire family. She felt ridiculous, a nearly 50-year-old woman hiding behind flowers like a thief in her own home. But the truth was, she had lived like a shadow for a long time. The one who cleaned up after parties, kept the accounts, remembered birthdays, the one no one truly saw. Now, she had to look. Through the large glass window of the living room, Rachel saw them clearly. Thomas stood very close to Brielle, too close. He held a wine glass, his other hand resting low on her back, a gesture that seemed unconscious but was terrifyingly intimate. Brielle tilted her face up toward him, her eyes glowing, not the gaze of a bride toward her future father-in-law, but the look of a woman who knew she was being desired. Rachel clenched her fists until her nails dug into her skin. She saw Brielle's lips move, saying something. Thomas leaned in to listen. He smiled. And then Brielle placed her hand on his chest, as if that was where she belonged. Rachel felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. 25 years. 25 years she had built this home, sat on that sofa reading stories to Noah when he was small, hosted birthdays, graduations, family dinners. And now, right there, Thomas was standing with another woman. Not just another woman, the fiancée of her son. Rachel wanted to rush in, smash everything, scream until the whole world heard this filth. She rose halfway, her mind burning, her hand already touching the back door. And then she saw a figure reflected in the glass. On the second-floor staircase, a silhouette stood completely still in the darkness. Noah. Her son. He stood like a statue, not crying, not moving, only watching. In that instant, Rachel was pinned in place. This was not only her pain, it was Noah's, a blade cutting into the heart of a young man on the eve of his wedding day. Down in the living room, Brielle tilted her head and laughed again. And then, as if the last boundary had dissolved, she rose onto her toes. Thomas lifted his hand to her hair. They kissed. Not a quick brush, not a mistake. It was a deep, long kiss, full of hunger, the kiss of people who had done this many times before. Rachel felt her world explode. Her ears rang, her eyes burned red, an invisible roar crashing in her chest. She stepped toward the door. 1 step, 2 steps, she would tear it open. But at that moment, a strong hand clamped around her arm. Rachel spun, her breath caught in her throat. Noah was there. He had quietly come down, slipped outside, found his mother among the flowers. Noah's face was ghost pale, his eyes lit with a cold fire that made Rachel shiver. He was no longer her boy. This was a man who had been betrayed by his own blood. "Mom, don't," Noah whispered, his voice raw, as if torn apart. Rachel trembled. "Noah, you saw it, I know," Noah said, each word falling heavy as stone. "I've known for weeks, and it's worse than you think." Rachel went numb. "Weeks?" Noah nodded, his jaw tight. "I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. I tried to think Dad was just being kind. Brielle was just anxious before marriage, but then I saw them too many times. The looks, the private conversations, the late messages." Noah swallowed hard. "And yesterday I saw them in the garden." Dad touched her hand like it was natural. Rachel felt herself sinking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Noah looked at her, his eyes dark. "Because I needed proof, and because I didn't want them to have a chance to deny it. I didn't want you to become the woman they called paranoid. I didn't want them to twist everything into being your fault." Rachel choked. In that moment, she realized Noah was not only hurting, he had been planning. He had turned pain into something sharp and cold. Inside, Thomas and Brielle had moved away from the fireplace, heading toward the sofa. Rachel could not bear to look again. She felt that one more glance would shatter her heart completely. Noah pulled her down behind the hydrangea bush. "Mom, trust me," he said, low but steady as steel. "Don't ruin everything right now." Rachel looked at her son, hot tears spilling down her face. "What are you going to do?" Noah stared straight at the glass, where his father's figure was fading behind the curtain. "I'm going to make them pay." A short sentence, cold, unshaking. Rachel suddenly understood. She had always thought she and Noah were gentle people, easy to overlook. But in this moment, hidden in the shadows behind the flowers, another truth emerged. The people who are underestimated the most are sometimes the most dangerous when they finally stand up. And Rachel Moore, the woman who had held her family together with silence her whole life, had just crossed the final line. She whispered, her voice hoarse. "Tell me the plan, Noah, because from this moment on, I am not the one who will forgive anymore." Noah did not answer right away. He kept staring through the glass, where the shapes of Thomas and Brielle were fading inside the living room, like two toxic shadows sliding across the family's past. Rachel could still feel her son's hand gripping her arm, as if the moment he let go, she would rush straight into that fire and burn everything to the ground. Mom Noah spoke so softly now, his voice no longer that of a groom about to be married, but of a man who had seen the naked truth. "Please don't do anything right now." Rachel trembled. "Don't do anything?" "You just saw them, I know," Noah cut in, his eyes dark. "But what do you think will happen if you storm in there now?" Rachel opened her mouth, but no words came. She could already picture Thomas turning around, calm, reassuring as always. "Rachel, you misunderstand. Brielle is just nervous. I was only comforting her like a father." Brielle would cry. She would shake. She would play the victim. And then everyone would look at Rachel like a woman going insane right before her son's wedding. Noah shook his head, his voice low but razor sharp. "They'll crush you with words before you ever get close enough to touch them." Rachel swallowed hard. She hated that Noah was right. Noah took a slow breath, then pulled his phone from his pocket. His hand trembled slightly, but his gaze was cold as steel. "Do you want to know why I've known for weeks?" Rachel looked at him, her heart pounding with pain. Noah unlocked the screen. His finger swiped once, and a photo appeared. Thomas and Brielle. They were walking into a luxury hotel in Denver, golden lights, a red carpet. Thomas in a dark coat, Brielle wearing sunglasses. They weren't even keeping distance. Rachel's mouth fell open. "This was 3 weeks ago," Noah said, his voice steady like reading an indictment. "A Tuesday." "Dad told you he was at a regional sales conference. Brielle told me she was having lunch with a friend." Noah swiped again. A second photo. They were leaving the hotel 2 hours later, Brielle's hair slightly messy, Thomas adjusting his collar like a man stepping out of another world. Rachel felt her stomach twist. Noah didn't stop. He swiped to the third, the fourth, the fifth. A dim restaurant. A private parking lot. A quiet street corner. Brielle leaning against Thomas, smiling brightly. Thomas holding her hand as if it were his right. "How many?" Rachel whispered, her voice hoarse. Noah looked at her. 14 times caught clearly. "And I know there were more." Rachel covered her mouth. Tears spilled down, but she made no sound. She was falling into a bottomless abyss. "I hired someone to follow them," Noah said, each word heavy. "I needed the truth. I needed proof they couldn't deny." Rachel stared at her son like she was seeing a stranger. Her Noah, the boy who used to fear the dark, now held in his hands a file that could destroy an entire family. "Noah the money?" Rachel stammered. Noah gave a bitter laugh, empty of joy. "Don't worry. I saved. And I was willing to pay any price not to be made a fool at the altar." Rachel's heart ached with pain, but also with pride. Noah was not as weak as she had feared. He was standing upright in the storm. Noah leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Mom, I have a plan." Rachel looked at him through tear-filled eyes. "What plan?" Noah paused, then spoke slowly, as if dropping stones into a deep well. "We're going to let the wedding happen." Rachel went still. No, we can't. You're going to—" Noah cut her off, sharp. "Listen to me. If we stop it now, they'll escape. They'll deny it. They'll act. Dad will manipulate. Brielle will turn herself into a misunderstood young woman. And then they'll come back in a few months, when everything quiets down, and they'll keep going." Rachel shook her head violently. "You're talking about your own wedding." Noah stared straight at her, a look that made Rachel shiver. "It's not my wedding anymore." They killed it a long time ago. The air between them thickened. Noah continued, his voice low and cold. "We're not just ending this. We're making sure they can never do this to anyone ever again." A chill ran down Rachel's spine. "What are you going to do?" Noah tilted his head, something ruthless flashing in his eyes. "Public. In front of everyone they want to impress. In front of Brielle's family. In front of Dad's friends. In front of this entire town." Rachel breathed faster. She glanced through the glass once more. Thomas, the man she had once loved, was sitting on the sofa where they once held Noah as a child. Brielle sat pressed close beside him, as if she had claimed that place. Rachel understood then. Forgiveness was dead. The patient wife was dead. In the flowers outside, another woman was waking up. a woman they had underestimated all her life. Rachel wiped her tears. Her voice became low, cold, unfamiliar even to herself. "Fine." She looked at Noah, each word like a blade. "Tell me the plan, and make it perfect. Because if today is the day this family collapses, it will collapse in the light of truth, not in the darkness of lies." Night fell over Aspen Ridge like a heavy velvet curtain. The house still glowed with lights prepared for the wedding, but inside, Rachel felt like a ghost walking among the living. Thomas came home that afternoon, smiling as if nothing had happened, asking about the menu, the speech, whether Noah was nervous. His deception was so thick that Rachel had to bite down hard to keep from letting out a bitter laugh. Noah played the role of the perfect groom. Rachel played the role of the happy mother. They exchanged glances now and then, a single look enough to understand they were standing on the same side now, a war without gunfire, but one that would end with the blood of honor. When Thomas finally went to bed, his steady snoring filling the room Rachel had shared with him for more than 2 decades, Rachel felt disgusted, as if she were lying beside a stranger. She waited until his breathing grew deep, then quietly slipped out of bed. Downstairs in the office, Noah was waiting. The door locked, the curtains drawn tight, the space now felt like a war room where the truth was stacked into files. On the desk, Noah's phone displayed photos that made Rachel feel sick. Beside it lay a brown envelope, several bank statements Rachel had never seen before. This was no longer suspicion. This was proof. This was war. Rachel lowered her voice, as if afraid the darkness could hear. "The person you hired to follow them, who was it?" Noah hesitated for a second. His eyes flashed with something between shame and determination. "Aunt Carmen." Rachel froze. Carmen Reyes, her sister. Carmen had once been a financial crimes investigator for years, leaving the field after a major case to open her own private investigation office. Rachel and Carmen were still close, but Rachel had never told her about the cold distance in her marriage. She had been too proud, too afraid to admit that the town's perfect husband might only be a mask. Noah looked at his mother, his voice low. "I didn't know who else to call. She's discreet, and she never fully trusted Dad." Rachel let out a dry laugh that sounded like a sob. "So Carmen saw what I kept refusing to see." Noah nodded. "She said she noticed the way Dad looked at Betrayal at the engagement party. She hoped she was wrong. But she wasn't." Rachel sank into a chair, her hands trembling. Noah dialed. Carmen answered almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for this call. "Rachel?" Carmen's voice was calm, sharp. "Something's happened, hasn't it?" Rachel tried to stay steady, but hearing her name was enough to shatter her. "Carmen, it's not okay. None of it is okay." And then Rachel told her everything. Noah's suspicions. What she had seen that morning. The kiss. The shamelessness in the living room. Rachel's tears broke free, the sobs she had forced down all day now spilling out like a flood. Carmen listened in silence. When Rachel finally stopped, Carmen exhaled. "Sis, I'm not surprised. I saw the way Thomas looked at that girl. I only hoped you wouldn't have to live through this." Noah spoke, his voice cold. "Do you have more?" "Yes," Carmen answered, and that single word made the air turn to stone. "More than you think." Rachel wiped her tears, her heart pounding. "Tell me." Carmen's voice shifted into something professional. "Thomas meets Betrayal regularly, twice a week, almost like clockwork. The St. Laurent Hotel in Denver. He pays cash. Expensive restaurants he never took you to, gifts, jewelry." Rachel felt heat rise in her chest. "Our money." Carmen paused. "And Rachel, that's not even the worst part." Rachel stopped breathing. "What do you mean?" Carmen lowered her voice. "I dug deeper into the money trail. Thomas has been making monthly payments for years to a woman named Danielle Brooks." The name meant nothing to Rachel. "Who is Danielle?" Carmen spoke slowly, as if each word were a bomb. She used to be an assistant at Thomas's old company about 14 years ago. She left suddenly, and a few months later, Thomas started sending money. Rachel's throat went dry. Why? Carmen's voice dropped. Danielle has a daughter. Her name is Lily, 16 years old. Rachel went rigid. Carmen continued, quiet but certain. The father isn't listed on the birth certificate. But Rachel, I've seen her photos. She has Thomas's eyes, his chin, his smile. I would bet my entire career that Thomas is her father. Absolute silence. Rachel couldn't breathe. The world tipped completely sideways. A child, a secret life, 16 years of betrayal, not only against her, but against Noah. Noah shot to his feet, his face drained white. A sister? Rachel heard her son's voice as if from very far away. Carmen spoke again, low but steady. You need to prepare. When this truth explodes, it will be a nuclear bomb. Rachel stared into the darkness of the office. In that darkness, the woman she had once been was fading away. In her place, something cold and sharp was waking. She whispered, her voice hoarse. Then we'll let it explode. And this time, they won't have anywhere left to run. The next morning arrived like a fever dream. The house awakened in the frantic rhythm of a wedding day, but Rachel felt as if she were walking through a cold nightmare. People laughed outside in the yard, bouquets were delivered, phones rang without stopping. Everything looked like a perfect portrait of happiness. Only Rachel knew that beneath the glossy surface, decay was spreading like poisonous fungus. Carmen arrived at midday, not through the front door. She slipped in through the back like a shadow, dressed simply, her eyes sharp as blades. She was no longer Rachel's little sister from years ago. Right now, Carmen looked like a prosecutor preparing to open a trial. Rachel met her inside a car parked discreetly behind the trees, far from curious eyes. That cramped space became the only place Rachel felt safe enough to hear the truth. Carmen opened her laptop, the screen lighting up with dense columns of figures. Rachel knew immediately these were not ordinary numbers. This was a map of betrayal. Do you think Thomas found the money for that life by accident? Carmen asked, her voice terrifyingly calm. Rachel swallowed hard. I don't know. He always said it was bonuses or investments. Carmen gave a cold smile. Right, he told you he was collecting rare coins. A hobby that needs cash, doesn't it? A pretty lie. Rachel stared at the screen. Carmen pointed to a highlighted column. For years, Thomas has been withdrawing cash regularly. 500 here, 700 there, never over 1,000 so the bank wouldn't flag it. And he withdrew from different branches, like a man who thought he was clever. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. Carmen switched to another tab. Here are the hotels. Here are the restaurant bills. Here is the jewelry. These payments match the withdrawal dates. Rachel saw a line, the Saint Laurent Hotel, a large amount, a date from last month. He was there with Betrayal? Rachel whispered. Carmen nodded. Twice a week, like an appointment. Rachel closed her eyes. She thought the pain had reached bottom, but Carmen wasn't finished. Do you know what the worst part is? Rachel opened her eyes, her heart pounding as if it wanted to break free. Carmen lowered her voice. It's not the cash, not the gifts. It's your future. Rachel didn't understand. Carmen typed a few keys. A document appeared, black letters on white, like a sentence. Thomas borrowed money from your retirement fund. Rachel went utterly still. What? Rachel ran her home accounting business and contributed steadily into her retirement fund as a way to protect her future. It was the one thing she believed no one could touch. Carmen pointed to the figure. Nearly $48,000 in 16 months. The air left Rachel's lungs. That's impossible. He would need my signature. Carmen looked her straight in the eyes. He had it. Rachel shook violently. No, I didn't sign. Carmen's voice dropped, slow as a verdict. He forged your signature. Rachel heard the blood roaring in her ears. Carmen pulled up 2 documents, a tax form Rachel had truly signed, and the loan request from the retirement fund. The signatures looked so similar most people would never notice. But Carmen lived in a world of small details. She pointed out the slight shifts, the angles that were wrong. Rachel trembled uncontrollably. This isn't just betrayal, Carmen said. This is theft. This is fraud. This is a crime. Rachel felt herself falling into emptiness. Thomas had not only shattered her heart, he was dismantling her life piece by piece, selling it to buy forbidden kisses. In Rachel's mind, the image of Thomas holding Betrayal blended with the image of him forging his wife's future, a monster in a suit. Rachel whispered, "He took my money to pay for her." Carmen nodded. "And there's something else." Rachel turned, her eyes burning red. "What else?" Carmen pulled out a thin envelope, a small stack of papers, and placed it onto Rachel's lap like a bomb. Preliminary DNA results. Rachel stared at it, her heart racing wildly. "I'm not ready." Carmen's voice softened for the first time. "You have to be. Truth doesn't wait." Rachel opened the envelope. Her hands shook so hard the paper crackled. Her eyes scanned the dry scientific lines until she reached the conclusion at the bottom. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Rachel stared as if the words might disappear if she looked too long. Lily Brooks was Thomas's daughter. 16 years. 16 years he had lived another life just a few towns away. Rachel lowered the paper, resting her head against the steering wheel. There were no tears left. She had gone beyond tears. A terrible stillness wrapped around her, like a frozen lake before it breaks. Noah would have a sister, another mother, a part of the family hidden in darkness. Rachel heard her own voice, cold and unfamiliar. "He didn't just betray me. He deceived the entire world." Carmen's eyes stayed hard. "And Betrayal," Carmen continued, twisting the knife. "Betrayal isn't innocent either. I've been investigating her." Rachel snapped around. "What else has she done?" Carmen opened a new file. Fake invoices. Transfers. Betrayal has been embezzling from her law firm, over $180,000 in a year. Rachel's mouth fell open. She's stealing?" Carmen nodded, and part of that money became gifts for Thomas. 2 thieves feeding each other with filth. Rachel felt the fire in her chest flare up, melting the ice. This was no longer about a husband's affair. This was a scheme, a circle of sin. Rachel lifted her head. Her eyes were no longer the eyes of an abandoned woman. They were the eyes of someone who had just discovered the power of truth. Her voice was low, each word heavy as stone. "Fine." She looked at Carmen. "We won't just stop the wedding. We will end them. And this time, they will fall not in silence, but in the light of the entire world." Evening fell over Aspen Ridge like a false promise. The last sunlight washed the garden in a gentle golden glow, making everything look like a fairy tale dream. People still laughed, still hurried about, still believed they were about to witness a perfect wedding. But inside Rachel, the fairy tale was dead. Only ashes remained. She moved through the house like a shadow. Congratulations from relatives passed her ears like distant rain. The fragrant bouquets no longer brought comfort, only the bitter reminder that this entire day was built on a foundation of lies. Noah was somewhere with his groomsmen. Thomas stood outside, shaking hands with guests, playing the role of the proud father. And Betrayal was in the dressing room, wearing white, like a counterfeit angel preparing to walk down the aisle. Rachel thought of Lily, a 16-year-old girl living in the darkness of a secret, carrying Thomas's eyes. A life hidden away, as if it were only a mistake meant to be buried. Carmen appeared beside Rachel in the hallway, her voice low. "You have to stay calm. Everything will go according to plan. Rachel nodded, but inside her something felt like a beast trapped in a cage, growling, desperate to be released. Noah met his mother in the office once more, just minutes before the guests began settling into their seats. He wore a black suit, his tie perfectly knotted. He looked like a groom from a dream, but his eyes were the eyes of a warrior. "Mom," Noah murmured, "everything is ready." Rachel looked at him, her chest tightening. "Are you sure?" Noah did not hesitate. "I've been sure ever since I saw Dad place his hand on her like she belonged to him." Rachel swallowed hard. She reached up to straighten her son's collar, a gesture she used to do when Noah was little. Now it felt like a farewell to another version of life. Noah met her gaze. "Mom, I'm sorry." "I'm sorry you have to see this." Rachel shook her head. "No, you don't need to apologize. They are the ones who should." Silence hung heavy between them. Then Noah lowered his voice like one last secret. "There's something else, Mom. Brielle. She isn't just a cheater. She's playing a bigger game." Rachel stared at him. "What game?" Noah glanced at Carmen, then said, "Aunt Carmen found a transfer. Money Thomas thought was a real estate investment, something Brielle sold him as a guaranteed opportunity, but it was a trap." Rachel felt ice run down her spine. "She tricked Thomas too?" Carmen nodded. "A shell company under one of Brielle's relatives. The money went in, then vanished." Thomas was blinded by desire and convinced he controlled everything. Rachel let out a dry laugh. How poetic. The man who thinks he's the smartest one is being fooled by the very person he betrayed his family for. Carmen's eyes stayed sharp. "Don't let it soften you. They're still accomplices, and today they will face the consequences." Rachel drew a deep breath. The air felt like knives in her lungs. Outside, the string music began. Gentle melodies flowed like water, covering the ground in false peace. The guests filled every seat, nearly 280 people, friends, colleagues, relatives, the very audience Thomas always wanted to impress. This was the perfect stage. Thomas sat in the front row beside Rachel. He placed his hand over hers, squeezing lightly in a gesture of affection. Rachel felt as if a snake were touching her skin. She did not pull away, not because she was weak, but because she wanted him to believe she was still the silent wife. Brielle appeared at the end of the aisle. The white gown shimmered. Flowers were woven into her hair. She was so beautiful it made people hold their breath. Rachel watched and thought, even a knife can be polished until it shines. Noah stood at the altar, his face unreadable. He watched Brielle approach as if she were a stranger. The moment Brielle passed the front row, her eyes flicked toward Thomas. Just a glance, quick, but enough. A flash of complicity, a shared secret, a silent victory. Rachel saw Thomas tilt his head slightly in return, and in that second, Rachel knew they thought they had won. They believed this wedding would cover everything, like a white cloth thrown over blood. But they did not know. Rachel Moore was no longer the woman who would stay silent. Noah looked down, his eyes meeting hers. He gave the smallest nod, a signal almost no one could see. It was time. Rachel felt her heart pounding, but her mind was strangely calm. She thought of Lily, of the stolen retirement fund, of Noah turned into a joke. A lifetime of lies was about to end. In a few minutes, this stage would no longer be a wedding. It would be a courtroom. The air in the wedding garden was stretched tight as a violin string. The music still flowed softly. The breeze still moved through the rows of white chairs. But Rachel felt as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for an explosion. Thomas sat beside her, back straight, his polished smile fixed on his face like a mask he could not remove. Brielle stood next to Noah at the altar, her hand resting on the groom's, looking like a flawless picture of perfection. But Rachel knew the truth, and the truth made everything disgusting. The officiant began with the familiar words about love, loyalty, faithfulness. Those beautiful phrases fell like curses. Noah listened without blinking. Brielle smiled at the right moments. Thomas looked on with false pride, and Rachel felt every sentence like a knife twisting into her heart. Finally, the moment arrived. "If anyone here has any reason to object to this marriage, speak now." Silence dropped over the crowd. 280 people. Not a sound, not a single strong breath. Rachel stood up. The chair scraped softly, but in that stillness, it sounded like thunder. Instantly, every head turned toward her. A ripple of whispers swept through the guests like cold wind. Thomas froze. He leaned closer, his voice tight with threat. "Rachel, what are you doing? Sit down. Don't do this." Rachel slowly pulled her hand away from his, as if withdrawing from something filthy. She looked straight at the altar. Noah stood there, his face pale but his eyes solid as stone. Brielle's brows tightened, her smile freezing on her lips. Rachel drew a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice rang out clear, cold, terrifyingly calm. "Forgive the interruption, but the officiant just asked a question." "And my answer is yes." A collective gasp broke from the crowd. Brielle's father, Mr. Hart, began to rise, his face flushed with anger. "Mrs. Moore, what is this?" Rachel turned toward him with a thin smile. "The truth, sir. The truth that everyone here deserves to know." Thomas sprang to his feet. "Rachel, you've lost your mind. You're destroying your son." Rachel looked back at him. There was not a single drop of love left in her eyes. "No, Thomas. You are the one who destroyed your son." Brielle stammered. "Rachel, you misunderstand." Rachel did not even look at her. She opened her small purse and pulled out the remote Carmen had given her. Her finger hovered over the red button like it was resting on a trigger. In Rachel's mind, everything became painfully clear. The years she had been underestimated, the lies, the stolen money, a 16-year-old girl living in darkness, Noah betrayed at the altar. She pressed it. The large screen behind the altar flickered to life. The first image appeared, Thomas and Brielle locked in a hungry kiss in the living room, beneath the family's own roof. Raw, unmistakable. The crowd exploded, shouts, gasps, phones lifted into the air. Brielle's mother clutched her chest, her face drained white. Noah's friends jumped to their feet. Thomas roared, "Fake!" "This is fake!" Rachel did not raise her voice. She only said, each word like ice, "Then explain this." The screen shifted. Thomas and Brielle walking into a hotel in Denver, the timestamp undeniable. Then another photo. And another. A chain of secret meetings, lunches in shadow, hands held that were never meant for family. Brielle began to tremble. "No, no," Rachel continued, her tone steady as an indictment. "This wasn't a single mistake. This was an affair that lasted for months." Thomas turned desperately toward Noah. "Son, listen to your father." Noah stared straight at him, his voice cold as steel. "You are not my father anymore." A single sentence, and the crowd went silent, as if slapped. Rachel pressed the button again. Bank statements filled the screen, cash withdrawals scattered over time, loans taken from the retirement fund. A forged signature, a jewelry receipt. Rachel spoke clearly. "My husband stole our future to finance this relationship." Thomas went rigid. His face flushed, then drained, as if the blood had been pulled from his body. Rachel was not finished. She turned her gaze to Brielle. "And this bride..." The screen changed to internal documents, fake invoices, strange transfers. She has been embezzling from her law firm. Brielle's partners, seated in the middle rows, shot to their feet, shock turning into pure fury. Brielle screamed, her voice breaking, "Stop it! Stop!" Rachel pressed the button one last time. A DNA report covered the screen. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Beneath it was a photo of Lily Brooks, a 16-year-old girl with eyes identical to Thomas's. Rachel felt her voice tremble slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of the truth. This is Thomas's daughter. A child he hid from me and from Noah for 16 years. Silence fell like a stone slab. 280 people. No one breathed. And in that horrifying stillness, Rachel watched Thomas's world collapse. There were no lies left to save him. No escape. Only consequences. The silence after the final blow stretched on like a nightmare that refused to end. 280 people sat frozen, mouths open, eyes wide, as if they had just watched a castle struck by lightning and collapse before them. Brielle trembled in her white gown, her face drained pale as paper. Thomas stood rigid, his eyes darting across the crowd, the screen, Rachel, like an animal cornered. Noah remained at the altar, completely still, but his gaze was sharper than any words. Then Brielle let out a sob, a small sound but painfully loud in the stillness. She swayed, clutching her bouquet like a lifeline, and collapsed onto the grass in a heap of lace and shattered illusions. That single sound broke the ice of silence. The garden erupted, shouting, crying, voices calling names. Chairs scraping out of place, eyes blazing with shock and sick curiosity. Phones lifted high like hundreds of extra eyes, recording this moment to turn it into the town's greatest rumor. Brielle's mother rushed to her daughter, hands shaking, words spilling out incoherently. Mr. Hart, her father, stood motionless, his face carved from stone, humiliation crushing his shoulders heavier than any sentence. Thomas blinked rapidly, as if trying to wake himself from a dream. But this was not a dream. This was truth, raw and impossible to burn away. He whirled toward Rachel, screaming, You planned this! You did this to kill me!" Rachel looked at him, her voice calm. "No, Thomas. You killed yourself." Thomas turned desperately toward Noah, reaching out a hand. "Noah, son, listen to your father." Noah did not move. He only spoke, each word clear as a blade. "Don't call me that. You don't deserve it." It was as if Thomas had been slapped. His entire life had been built on respect, and now, in front of hundreds of people, his own son stripped that title from him. For a moment, Thomas did the only thing a coward could do. He ran. No words. No explanation. No courage. Thomas shoved through the crowd, knocking people aside, tipping over a tray of champagne. Glass shattered across the ground, the sound like his life breaking. He sprinted toward the parking lot, as if running fast enough could outrun the truth. But truth is always faster. From beside a large oak at the edge of the property, Carmen stepped out. She was still dressed as catering staff, small in stature, but her stride was steady, like an officer who had spent a lifetime facing criminals. Thomas never saw her in time. Carmen stepped forward. A perfect trip. Thomas crashed onto the manicured grass, sliding several feet in his expensive suit. His ragged breathing sounded humiliatingly raw. Carmen approached, her voice as casual as asking the time. "Where are you going, Thomas?" Thomas looked up, panic in his eyes. "Move!" Carmen bent closer, her smile cold. "No, not today." "You're not running anymore." Noah had stepped down from the altar and stood beside Rachel. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a promise that she was not alone. Rachel felt her strength slipping away, but Noah kept her upright. Brielle had been pulled back up by her mother, her face smeared with tears and makeup. She stared at Rachel like an enemy. You plan to ruin my life." Noah turned toward her, his voice not loud but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "No, Brielle, you ruined your own life. You betrayed me. You committed crimes. You chose that." Brielle opened her mouth, but there were no words left that could save her. Then came the steady sound of footsteps. 2 police officers appeared at the gate, moving through the crowd as people instinctively parted. No one dared stand in their way. They walked straight toward Brielle. "Brielle Hart?" one of them asked, his voice firm. Brielle backed away, eyes wide with fear. "No." "You are under arrest on suspicion of embezzlement and wire fraud." Each word landed like a stone. The officer took her wrist, gentle but unyielding. The handcuffs clicked open. The sound of metal closing was sharp and cold, like an ending. Brielle gasped, then screamed, a panicked cry of someone realizing this was not just humiliation. This was prison. This was real consequence. Brielle's mother sobbed, clinging to her daughter but unable to stop it. Mr. Hart stood frozen, his eyes hollow, his family's honor turning to dust before him. Thomas, held firmly by Carmen, watched with late horror. He had thought he controlled everything. He had thought he was the smartest one. Now he was only a man exposed under the light. As Brielle was led away, her wedding dress dragging across the grass like a white flag of surrender, the crowd began to break apart. Some people fled quickly. Some remained, whispering. Some kept filming without stopping. Rachel stood among the ruins of the perfect day she had once prepared. Her legs felt weak. The world tilted gently. Noah wrapped his arms around her and whispered into her ear, "It's over, Mom. Finally, it's over." Rachel lifted her gaze to the evening sky, where the sunlight was fading. She didn't know if this was an ending or a beginning. She only knew she could breathe for the first time in months. 3 hours after the explosion in the garden, Aspen Ridge no longer felt like a quiet town. It had become a crime scene. The blue and red lights of police cars reflected off the rows of white chairs that had never been cleared away. Low voices, radio chatter, hurried footsteps blended into a chaotic soundtrack after the wedding that was never finished. Rachel sat on the stone steps outside the back door, arms wrapped around herself as if trying to keep her body from falling apart. Noah sat beside her in silence. He was still in his suit, his tie still perfectly straight, but his eyes looked as if they had aged years in a single day. Carmen stood nearby, speaking with the officers, calm in the way of someone who understood consequences. She was no longer just an aunt, no longer just a sister. She was the one keeping everything on track while the world collapsed. Brielle had been placed into a patrol car. Her white wedding dress stood out in the darkness like a cruel joke. She cried, screamed, begged, but the handcuffs were locked. The door slammed shut, ending forever the dream she believed she could build on betrayal and crime. Thomas was not in cuffs, not today. Financial fraud would be handled by lawyers, by courts, by cold paperwork. But Rachel knew his real punishment had begun the moment he was seen exposed and naked before the entire town. After Carmen stopped him, Thomas stood there for a long time, breathing hard, eyes wild. Then, like a lost shadow, he walked to his car. He did not say a word to Rachel. He did not look at Noah. He simply opened the door, climbed in, and drove away into the night. A coward always chooses to run. Rachel watched him go, with no tears left. The pain had moved beyond crying. It had become a hollow emptiness inside her chest. Noah finally broke the silence, his voice rough. "Mom, are you okay?" Rachel gave a bitter laugh with no sound. "I don't know. I think I'm just numb." Noah nodded, his gaze fixed on the grass where everything had happened, where vows had turned into mockery, where love had been exposed like an open wound. Police took statements. Carmen handed over Brielle's files, the fake invoices, the transfers, the evidence strong enough to lock her life behind bars. Brielle's partners left with faces cold as stone. The Hart family disappeared into humiliation. When the last guests finally left the garden, only Rachel, Noah, and Carmen remained among the wreckage. That night, Rachel did not sleep. She sat in the office where it had all begun, staring at the thick envelope Carmen placed on the desk. Inside were copies of the evidence, the forged signature, the retirement fund loan, the cash withdrawals, the DNA results. Lily Brooks, a girl Rachel had never known, yet carrying the face of the greatest betrayal of her life. The next morning, Rachel did exactly what she had prepared for, as if some part of her had always known this day would come. She went straight to a lawyer's office. In her bag was a signed divorce petition and a USB containing every piece of proof. Rachel did not shake. She did not cry. She walked in like a woman saving herself from ashes. The lawyer looked at her gently. "Are you sure?" Rachel answered, each word nailed into place. "I'm sure." With evidence of fraud and forged signatures, Thomas had no room to bargain. The divorce moved quickly and brutally. Rachel kept the house, at least for now, as compensation for what he had stolen. She recovered most of what remained, not as victory, but as restitution. Betrayal faced prison. She accepted a plea deal. 2 years in a low-security facility. Repayment of every dollar she had embezzled. Her family stayed silent, their honor torn apart. Thomas lost his job, lost his friends, lost his polished laughter. The people who once raised glasses with him now turned away. But the story did not end there. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. Rachel opened it with hands that felt numb. Danielle Brooks, Lily's mother. The letter was short, apologizing for the pain, saying Lily had learned the truth through the news and wanted to meet Noah, wanted to know the brother she had never been allowed to have. Rachel sat with the letter for a long time. Lily was living proof of a lie, but she was also a victim. Noah read it, and for the first time in days, something in his eyes softened. "I want to meet her, Mom." Rachel looked at her son, her heart tightening. "Are you sure?" Noah nodded. She didn't do anything wrong. She was abandoned in the dark, just like we were. Rachel closed her eyes. Part of her wanted to refuse, to slam that door forever. But another part, stronger, understood the truth had destroyed them, but it could also create something new, a smaller family. Less perfect, but real. Rachel opened her eyes, her voice quiet. "All right, we'll meet Lily." And in the silence after the storm, Rachel realized this was only the first step into a new life. 3 hours after the explosion in the garden, Aspen Ridge no longer felt like a quiet town. It had become a scene of aftermath. The blue and red lights of police cars reflected off the rows of white chairs that had not yet been cleared away. Low conversations, radio crackles, hurried footsteps, all blended into a chaotic melody after the wedding that was never completed. Rachel sat on the stone steps outside the back door, arms wrapped around herself as if holding her body together. Noah sat beside her in silence. He was still wearing his suit, his tie still straight, but his eyes looked as if they had aged years in a single day. Carmen stood nearby, speaking with the officers, calm like someone long familiar with consequences. She was no longer just an aunt, no longer just a sister. She was the one keeping everything moving in the right direction while the world collapsed. Betrayal had been placed into a patrol car. Her white wedding dress stood out in the darkness like a bitter joke. She cried, screamed, begged, but the cuffs were locked. The door slammed shut, ending forever the dream she thought she could build on betrayal and sin. Thomas was not in handcuffs, not today. Financial fraud would be handled by lawyers, by courtrooms, by cold pages of paperwork. But Rachel knew his real punishment had begun the moment he was seen exposed and naked in front of the entire town. After Carmen stopped him, Thomas stood there for a long time, breathing hard, eyes wild. Then, like a shadow with no direction, he walked toward his car. He said nothing to Rachel. He did not look at Noah. He simply opened the door, climbed in, and drove away into the night. A coward always chooses to run. Rachel watched him go with no tears left. The pain had passed beyond crying. It had become a deep, hollow emptiness in her chest. Noah finally broke the silence, his voice rough. "Mom, are you okay?" Rachel gave a bitter laugh without sound. "I don't know. I think I'm just numb." Noah nodded, his gaze fixed on the grass where everything had happened, where vows had turned into mockery, where love had been exposed like an open wound. The police came to take statements. Carmen handed them Betrayal's files, the fake invoices, the transfers. the evidence strong enough to lock her life behind bars. Her partners left with faces cold as stone. The Hart family disappeared into shame. When the last guests finally left the garden, only Rachel, Noah, and Carmen remained among the wreckage. That night, Rachel did not sleep. She sat in the office where it had all begun, staring at the thick envelope Carmen placed on the desk. Inside were copies of the evidence, the forged signature, the retirement fund loan, the cash withdrawals, the DNA results. Lily Brooks, a girl Rachel had never known, yet carrying the face of the greatest betrayal of her life. The next morning, Rachel did exactly what she had prepared for, as if some part of her had always known this day would come. She went straight to a lawyer's office. In her bag was a signed divorce petition and a USB containing every piece of proof. Rachel did not tremble. She did not cry. She walked in like a woman saving herself from ashes. The lawyer looked at her gently. "Are you sure?" Rachel answered, each word firm as a nail. "I'm sure." With evidence of fraud and forged signatures, Thomas had no room to bargain. The divorce moved quickly and brutally. Rachel kept the house, at least for now, as compensation for what he had stolen. She recovered most of what remained, not as victory, but as restitution. Brielle faced prison. She accepted a plea deal, 2 years in a low-security facility, repayment of every dollar she had embezzled. Her family stayed silent, their honor torn apart. Thomas lost his job, lost his friends, lost his polished laughter. The people who once raised glasses with him now turned away. But the story did not end there. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. Rachel opened it with hands that felt numb. Danielle Brooks, Lily's mother. The letter was short, apologizing for the pain, saying Lily had learned the truth through the news and wanted to meet Noah, wanted to know the brother she had never been allowed to have. Rachel sat with the letter for a long time. Lily was living proof of a lie, but she was also a victim. Noah read it, and for the first time in days, something in his eyes softened. "I want to meet her, Mom." Rachel looked at her son, her heart tightening. "Are you sure?" Noah nodded. She didn't do anything wrong. She was abandoned in the dark, just like we were. Rachel closed her eyes. Part of her wanted to refuse, to slam that door forever. But another part, stronger, understood the truth had destroyed them, but it could also create something new. A smaller family, less perfect, but real. Rachel opened her eyes, her voice quiet. "All right. We'll meet Lily." And in the silence after the storm, Rachel realized this was only the first step into a new life. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moment of this story. Sometimes the cracks in a family don't come from outsiders, but from the very people we trust the most. Yet it is often in our most painful moments that we discover our true strength and learn how to move forward with the truth. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and share your feelings or your own experience. Every story matters, and perhaps yours will help someone out there feel a little less alone. Don't forget to hit like to support the channel and help this video reach more people. And if you enjoy dramatic, emotional family stories with deep lessons like this one, subscribe today and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next episodes. See you again in the next story.